I will ask everybody to come up to the stage for our next panel. Could you, well, let's see, I can advance the slide myself. Hang on. It's not as easy as on Zoom, but it's a lot more fun to have you guys here. Let me just get to our panel here. Okay, so thank you, Chris, for that excellent keynote and kicking off our panel where Open Science Meets FOSS4G. On our panel, I want to say hello to everybody from Dr. Sophia Liu. Sophia was instrumental in putting this together, but was unable to attend due to exigencies at USGS at the last second, so I'm going to stand in as the moderator. But while Chris is coming back, I'd like the panelists to just introduce themselves, and we'll start with Paige. Just introduce yourself and your work, and then we'll just kick off the panel.
Yes, hello. Great, my mic is working. Hello, my name is Paige Martin. I am a support scientist in NASA's Office of the Chief Science Data Officer, and we work to support and enable open science at NASA and beyond.
Hey, I'm Ryan Abernathy. I'm an oceanographer and climate scientist by training. I've been a professor at Columbia University for the past decade, but in the past year, I recently went on leave from that and started our new company called EarthMover, where we're building a cloud data platform for scientific data.
Morning, everyone. I'm Sudhir Shrestha. I'm with the NOAA Office of Water Protection, so I'm technical manager for the Web and Data Service Program. So what we are trying to do about how to make our data a lot more interoperable and accessible to the large hydrology program. So this is a great actually community. This is my first time being in a FOSS4G, so I'm very excited about this panel, and thanks for taking time.
And Chris Holmes with Planet. I just blathered a lot.
Thank you guys so much. All right, well, let's kick it off with, and I'll just come back down the line again. Paige, if you wouldn't mind starting out with, can you describe how NASA and your programs at NASA support open science, and how open source software in this community, collaborating with this community, might benefit those open science efforts?
Yeah, so NASA has really prioritized open science. Actually, for quite a while, NASA data has been openly available, not necessarily readily usable, for many decades, and so that's what we're really working on now. We have something called the Open Source Science Initiative, and this is really where the core of the support for open science comes from. We're looking at establishing policies for NASA scientists and NASA-funded scientists on how to do their work openly. We're looking at incentives, so that includes funding incentives. So what funding can we put in place to support communities like you in doing the work openly? We're also running some prizes and challenges to really incentivize open principles while doing scientific research. And we also have a community aspect, which is NASA's Transform to Open Science, or TOPS initiative. And that's really trying to engage the community, because we recognize that open science isn't just about, the products isn't just about making our data and our software open. It's about this culture change where we do our science in a more collaborative way, where we can really build upon one another's work and not have to reinvent the wheel. But we recognize that affects the incentives for individuals compared to kind of all of science. Where we see this as progressing science faster, we'll be able to build on top of everyone's work. But for any individual, it might take a little bit more time to do your work in a more open way, to establish the right documentation and metadata for your code and your data. So that's really one of our big focuses, is engaging with the community. Then we also are looking at infrastructure. So this is, what infrastructure do we need that would be kind of core across all of NASA? That's where we're starting right now, because we don't even have that within NASA, and then hopefully we can expand to work with other government agencies and organizations as well. So how working with communities like this one, I have to say this is my first FOSS4G. It's very exciting. It's been a really wonderful and welcoming community so far. And I see a lot of potential collaboration. So a lot of what we do at NASA and other government agencies, we sometimes move a bit slower than some of the open source communities that we might all be familiar with, which can be a little annoying on one side, but I think it's also nice to have different entities that are moving at different timescales. It takes us some time, but we do listen to the community. So NASA, especially NASA Earth Science and Earth Data, we are using a lot of the tools that you all are helping to develop. We're using Stack, we're using ZAR. It took us a little while to get there, but we are now full steam ahead. And so a lot of what you can do is kind of continuing to do what you're doing and make it known. Make sure to talk to people like me at NASA and others so that we know what you're doing. And it might take some time, but we do digest that and we try and then use these tools ourselves and also give back through funding and other opportunities. So I guess that's what I'll say for now, and I'll let others continue.
Okay. Ryan, how about in your work at EarthMover? How are you all supporting our open science? And how could this collaboration help it?
For me, my journey into open science starts long before EarthMover. It goes back to around 2015, when I was more or less still a normal mainstream scientist, not a data person. And some of my colleagues at NASA JPL ran an ocean model at groundbreaking, unprecedented high resolution to simulate things like ocean eddies and tides. Global 1 kilometer mesh, which doesn't sound like a lot maybe to the imagery people, but this model dumped out 4 petabytes of data onto a NASA supercomputer. And the data was absolutely gorgeous and fascinating. The little peaks we were able to get inside of that very opaque, dense 4 petabyte data set. And I was just struck by the gap between how transformative this data was going to be for our field and how inaccessible it was, even to me, a very capable and well-resourced researcher, let alone to the thousands of other potential users of that data, in the US, in the developing world, and at that moment, I kind of had this big pivot in my career to really focus on this question of how can we make all of this amazing weather, climate, ocean data much more accessible, and how can we scale up our approach to working with data to meet this challenge of petabytes and petabytes of Earth system data. That led me down a path of getting involved in open source software. I started working on open source Python tooling for working with data, packages like Xarray and ZAR. And we started the Pangeo project, which is a community platform and organization aimed at sort of coordinating efforts around scaling up data analytics in climate and adjacent fields. We got involved in the cloud because we saw that the cloud had the potential to be this sort of common ground where everyone could access the same data and could access computing to work with that data. That's a much better situation than when the data was locked up on one agency supercomputer where you needed to 6-month security clearance process to even get access. So there's been a lot of progress that's been made. We started EarthMover because we saw that the process of moving to a cloud-native data infrastructure for scientific data was still too inaccessible. It required a lot of really custom engineering and a lot of expertise that was not well distributed in our community. So our goal is to build a platform that's going to make it easier to bring scientific data into the cloud, distribute it in the sort of cloud-native spatial data infrastructure that Chris talked about, and to make those capabilities available to any organization, agency, or company who wants them. So that's what we're trying to do today.
Cool. Sudhir, there's a lot of NOAA, obviously, but how would your open science efforts benefit from collaboration with this community, do you think?
Thanks, Eddie. I think very, very relevant, right? I just want to actually start my days when I was in grad school, why I'm motivated here, and so glad to be in this committee again. To acknowledge this is my first 4G as first FOSS4G as well. But I remember when I was in grad school trying to do my research and trying to find the data, I couldn't find one, right? I was trying to scrape the data from NASA, I was trying to scrape the data from NOAA, but I did not know where to really find them, right? I did not know anyone, I didn't have any point of contact to ask for data sets. There are so many places that you could go, right? So remembering those days, sort of motivation around, if there's an opportunity for me to come back to any institution like that and see if I can make that data a lot more available and accessible to the users, that would have been great and fantastic. So my career journey, I had an opportunity to work in academia and the industry. Then I came back to work for NOAA as a part of like in weather service, especially like in our hydro program now. What we're trying to do is actually trying to collaborate with the open source community as well as the COTS, right? We, as a government, we just need to make sure that we have users who are in the both domain of the bucket, both buckets. Some are using the open source, some are using the COTS. So we just need to find sort of bridge where we can actually cross-path those opportunities as well, right? As a part of that, what we're trying to do and what I see this community can help us also is to bridge that gap as well, right? Because a lot of you work in the open source community as well as the COTS, right? And then some of the work that we're doing to make our data set a lot more accessible, I think there will be a lot also conversation about like how it's going to enable the open science, right? The challenge that we have is like not only the data that's available sitting somewhere else, but how we're going to make it available to the larger community. Now that everybody is moving towards the cloud, how those on-prem systems and the data system that we have will be available in the cloud. And talking about Chris talked about like cloud native and geospatial. That's the domain we would like to go down there. So we're trying to work this community to help us actually get into that direction. So we are trying ourselves, but what we're doing is not enough to help to accelerate that. So what I'm expecting for this community is like, we are able to share our data and the services through the repository, right? We have data sitting there, but we produce a whole lot of data set. But how we're going to make it available to larger uses is something that we need also your help to make that happen, right? And that's why we also participate in a lot of the open science initiatives, like some of this year you may be aware of, like this year OSTP actually announced 2023 as a year of open science, right? So basically what we're trying to do actually foster the collaboration within all the federal governments as well, so that we are working together to enable the data to everybody, so that that actually leverages the data and the services. But a lot of the times when you talk about the open science, we're only talking about the data as well, but there are a lot to it, right? Because there are a lot of the software content to it. There's a lot, also the research output comes out, those are publications that are how we're going to make those available to larger community. And the software code base, how we're going to maintain some of those code base is also one of our challenges as well. Right, so a lot of you contribute back into some of those software development as well, but how, as a government, we can have access to those and interact with the community, this is something we're looking forward to. So I do see that there's a lot more opportunity to actually collaborate with the stakeholders, and the government can be one of the players to help accelerate some of the open science effort in this community. So we're looking forward to that collaboration.
Thanks, Nir.
Yep.
Chris, you identified some of the Planet open science efforts here. Can you talk a little bit more about how Planet is sitting in the interface there between open science and open source software?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, they didn't really talk about Planet at all, but we have a constellation of satellites that take pictures of the Earth, and the founders were all from NASA, and so that sort of open science is very much in their blood. And the way we tend to work is partnering with different people who are able to kind of help fund us to open data. So the NICFI, I think it's Norway's Forest Initiative, has funded completely open data for the tropics, and we've seen a whole bunch of people building deforestation stuff and planetary variables on top of that. And yeah, we have a whole education research program that makes the data available to a number of institutions, and then through NASA, any researcher in the federal government, not just NASA, but NOAA, et cetera, who's doing research can access the full Planet Archive. So yeah, it's definitely something that we really want to see and encourage as much as possible.
Cool. I want to speak a little bit for Sophia, and as she has in her title the participatory open science lead at USGS. So there's a lot of open science, and Sophia and I spent a good bit of time talking about open science means different things to different people. But I do know for certain that USGS has a number of programs that are very much about citizens contributing to scientific efforts and then bringing it together. So one thing I will just say for this conference and also for the Fed Geo Day gathering, which is, I think, one of the keys for open science and open source software collaboration is just us getting together. And Chris, you really laid out that the meeting of data and software and standards. Well, it needs to happen here in this kind of forum. So one of the things I would also say in terms of fostering this collaboration is that anybody here that wants to help me and Guido and Maggie Colley and Sophia and the people who are convening these things, please let me know if you're interested in helping us with the next FOSS4G North America so that we can continue this dialogue and make these forums happen. Matt Hansen, many other people here on that have volunteered to help that. So this, in a way, part of my answer on the collaboration is to bring you guys together. All right, I just want to quickly go to the next question, and this is, I'll start with Sudhir because this is really specifically down your line. How will open science benefit the weather, water, and climate enterprise, and what role will FOSS4G, if at all, play in that collaboration, help make that happen?
Thanks, Eddie. I think you just touched the heart of what I do, right? So thank you. Very relevant questions, right? So, what we're trying to do a lot more focus on the weather, water, and then the climate enterprise. I do focus a lot more on the water enterprise, but in general, the community, what we're trying to build is that will help us in a sense, like what we're trying to do right now, like I just said earlier, we want to make sure that our data sets is a lot more accessible, right? How are we going to do that? For till now, all of our data sets, most of our data sets, at least in our program, was sitting on our on-prem system, right? And from there, we have an issue of the infrastructure, right? Because we don't have enough bandwidth to make the data set available. So a lot of the times, I'm sure you may have experience, like if you're trying to download data, you may got throttled or you may got banned, right? You got blacklisted sometimes, right? But there is a reason to it because, there are a lot. We want to make sure the bandwidth is available to everyone, right? And so that the data set is available to everyone. So there is equal distribution of the data access to provide to that. So how we're going to overcome some of those challenges that we do right now? So what we're trying to do actually move some of those data sets into the cloud, and that's where all of you may be aware, right now, the way the forecast data sets are coming out as a NetCDF, right? We're writing that as NetCDF because that's how we store our data sets. But all of you who've been working on this domain know how challenging it can be when you're trying to access the data in NetCDF, right? And you're trying to do any large analysis in the cloud, right? So that's where some of the work that I see here in this community group, trying to work on cloud native, cloud optimized data, some of the work Ryan has led on the doing, and then the Chris has led doing on the optimizing the data available in the cloud, right? So that is what we're trying to do, just get started. And I also want to resonate some of what Paige was talking about, yes, we're a little bit slow, right? But there is a reason. We do not have tremendous amount of resources, right? So, and again, we just want to make sure that, because we have to go through the procedures to make the data sets available to larger community, right? And that's why the pace can be somewhat slow, But we're not that slow, right? I'm positive about it. I mean, we're not that slow. I mean, there are some folks who are trying to work with the community here. We're trying to work with academia and also the private industry to make sure that we are in the pace, right? So that's where we're actually heading towards right now, is to make sure that all the data that's coming up, at least of our program on the water side, what we're trying to do is we get the data set, but the data is also accessible, but in a way that the people can use it and make sense out of it, right? So we are working towards that, but that's what we're trying to do, trying to make, I don't know if you're aware of that, NOAA has a program called, data dissemination, or the open data dissemination effort. That's where we actually move the data into all three cloud service providers, right? That's Microsoft, AWS, and then the Google. So what we're trying to do is make all our data set available into those cloud providers. And also trying to make sure that the data sets are actually cloud optimized as much as possible, but we're heading into that direction. So what I can see the opportunity here with this community actually, that you can help us to get to that stage, right? Definitely, we need to find some way that how we can improve the data accessibility, but also some collaborative research that we can work on, right? And please reach out. I will be here all day today to talk through, but definitely looking forward to some of those collaboration and the feedback as well, right? This is something we're pretty new on the cloud optimized work that we're trying to make available to the public. But this is something we'd like you to go and get some of our data set, provide us the feedback, and help us grow. This is something I think this is where I see there's an opportunity to innovate some of the work that we're trying to do here, and having definitely trust to what we do and some of the transparency. We're trying to be transparent, what we're trying to do, and share the data to the community. So definitely, and the last what I'll say is from the government perspective, we can also help some of the accelerate and sort of coordinate some of the efforts around here, right? So that you can help us in our work, what we're trying to do, but also we can help you to get there. So this is something we can work together in that domain. I'm looking forward to a lot more.
I'll take a little different tack on that, and I'll start with Paige here. Are there other federal mandates or specific agency goals that you see that this collaboration between your open science efforts and the FOSS4G community would further?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is interesting working in government. I've been here for less than a year, and before that I was a postdoc doing climate research. I realized several of them kind of said their introductory kind of stories of how they got here. That was kind of mine. I was in the climate modeling community. Very interestingly, it seems like a largely different community than this one, but they seem very similar. And I think I could see a lot more communication and collaboration with those communities. In this year working at NASA, I have really understood how important it is to have these government mandates and to have the government, working on some of this open science. So we might seem a little slow. We have a lot more structures in place that we have to follow sometimes than a lot of the rest of the community. And that's, I think, really where we benefit from collaborating with people like you. I know you all work in very different sectors with your own, red tape, but we all have our different red tape in different ways. I think that's really where I can see this kind of collaboration being really fruitful for all of us. And so I guess going back a little bit to the previous question, talking specifically about climate and weather and water science. These are inherently global sciences. We have oceans and land and rivers and weather everywhere on the planet. And especially with things like climate change, we really want to make sure that we get research and we can take climate action in all the locations around the globe. And what that really means is engaging scientists and researchers and decision makers and software developers and data managers in every location on the globe. And to do that, we need to make sure that we are not putting in place barriers based on the tools and the data that we're using. So to me, this is really one of the best aspects of this idea of open science, that we can really engage with the entire globe so we can actually address these very important issues that everyone is going to face and is already facing today. So as far as these federal mandates, I mean, one of the reasons why we are here today, why NASA and NOAA and many other agencies are really putting open science at the forefront, was from a memo that came out of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy that said they want basically equitable access to government-funded data and research. Now that's very specific in the U.S., and that is one of the things that we are working within. We are U.S. government agencies, so we are prioritizing U.S. communities, and that's where I think this collaboration with all of you can really help make that more international. So that's kind of where we are coming from in a lot of this. Yeah, NASA is really big about making their data available to everyone. I wouldn't say that's a mandate, but that is one of our big goals. And that is, we can't really, as Chris was mentioning in his talk, we can't really talk just about the data. It's this whole structure, this infrastructure altogether, the software, the standards, all of these things. And so that's really where this community comes in and helping to set some of these standards, helping to create some of this infrastructure so that we really can make our data available. So, yeah, that's my response there.
Ryan, you're kind of working at it from the problem up. I mean, how do you see the collaboration with the open science and open source communities furthering federal societal goals too?
It's a great question. I want to try a little audience participation here to get at this. So raise your hand if you're personally concerned about the climate crisis. Keep your hand up if you feel like the work you're doing in your day job is contributing in some even infinitesimal way towards the solutions. That's awesome to see, right? So one thing that's changed that I've seen over the past 10 years is the awareness of the urgency of the climate problem. And you can see that in the room today. I bet there's a lot more hands up today than there would have been at this conference 10 years ago. We can, though, especially see this in what's happening in the private sector. There's a huge interest in the climate problem, not just as an academic research problem, but as something that is affecting the bottom line of so many businesses across the economy. So we're seeing this explosion of climate tech, right, which means a lot of different things, but a big part of that means using data, much of it geospatial data, to make decisions about how this economy is going to adapt to climate change. In the open science world, we care a lot about reproducibility as like one of the virtues of open science. And it's almost so widely accepted that like we don't even question like why we care about reproducibility. Like it's just like, oh, it's like one of the 10 commandments of open science is it's supposed to be reproducible. As I've gotten to understand the private sector perspective, I've learned that reproducibility has this flip side that's very, very important to many big companies and organizations, which is transparency of how decisions are being made. How, if a company decides they're going to raise your insurance policy because your home is now at some increased risk for wildfire, people want to know why. They want to understand how that decision was reached, what data went into it, what sort of processing and analysis went into that. Regulators want to know these things, and in fact, need to start regulating this type of climate information much more carefully than they are today. So the role that sort of open science and open source software and open data can play is to create this transparency in and reproducibility in how we're using climate information to make these really important society-wide decisions. And that information should not just be locked up within, a few analysts or a few companies that are sort of doing that work. That is really everyone's right to understand, examine, and scrutinize how those decisions are being made. So what does that mean in practice? Well, open standards are a big part of this. Right? How we share and exchange data. Things like being able to identify the provenance of data, understanding where data came from. And a much harder problem, I think, is understanding how analysis was performed, particularly once we start using relatively opaque models, like AI-based models, how those models are reaching their conclusions, making that code and those models open and available to scrutiny, available to build upon. These are all things that are good from an open science point of view, but they're also going to really accelerate our species' ability to adapt to this really urgent crisis. So that's a pretty great motivation, I think, for all of us to keep working on this, keep trying to work together and improve the way all of our systems interoperate with this big challenge and goal in mind.
Thank you, Ryan. Sudhir, I know that NOAA has many policies, goals, et cetera. How would this collaboration, can you elaborate any more on how this open science, open source software collaboration might help you meet mandates that you're facing or going to face?
So again, so the mandates, I will not talk about, say, the mandates, but, this is our goal, right? Because our primary goal is to serve the American public, right? And what we would like to do is to make sure our data is available. But again, the requirement had changed, right? Because if you remember, before, we're able to put our data sets into the FTP server, and then we say, okay, now data is publicly available, right? But what does that mean, right? Because that data is available, but really not available, right? So we're sort of like a gearing from there to moving towards how we actually make our data set a lot more accessible. I think that's where we're moving towards, So there is a mandate, yes, there is a requirement that, all most of the data set that they're coming out of the research and also the operational data, that's available to the public for use, right? So that's the goal we're heading towards, and we're trying to make sure that those data sets are usable. And again, what Ryan was trying to say, repeatable. That is something we also would like to make sure there is a data integrity as well, right? We want to make sure the data sets that we're making available has the enough metadata to what that indexes to the users. A lot of the times the data set is there make it available, but they don't know what that data means, right? So we're trying to do some due diligence now to make sure that we have a rich metadata set as possible. And I'm sure a lot of you who are working on the data domain, nobody likes to do that metadata job, right? Because that's a hard thing to do, right? So we're actually working diligently to make sure that we're spending time to write the metadata that follows the standards as well, because the standardization is also something we're looking at, right? So this is one of the important things for open science is not only the data itself, but also how the data set is available, but also the processes that goes behind that, right? A lot of the research publication that's coming out, right? How can we make that the work available so that processes can be repeated by someone else, right? So that's the goal we're heading towards.
Okay. Cool. Chris, you've heard a lot of different responses and reactions now to your challenge, and you've been on standards bodies, et cetera. How do you see, do you have any more thoughts, or is anything that popped to your mind now on open science, FOSS, communication, collaboration?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to my mind is just Yeah, I mean, one, the ease, like how we can make this as easy as possible and not just kind of like say, here it is, here's the standard, go figure it out. But I mean, education material, tutorials, and tools that make it even easier. And then to me, the thing that I think I hit on briefly, but does feel like there's something there with how do we break down the line between producer and consumer. You know, right now it's very much like publish out, you look to the federal agency, they put their science out, like the scientist makes the thing, you hope he fills out the thing, to making it so more people are participating. And I think it's something we feel in open source software, like when you put something out, you're psyched to see the feedback and that inspires you to more. You're psyched to see people collaborate with you and actually make your stuff better. And I think that creates this virtuous cycle and feedback loop. And yeah, I think you guys have hit on it, but like, and I don't have the answer, but I think that to me is the thing that I think will eventually make this all work, where it's not just like, oh, please, like, fund this and the resources are limited, but like, what are we all working on together? And yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to the data and how do we actually like work with the data, make the data available, make it accessible, and figure out these feedback loops where, yeah, it's easy to like take the NOAA data, combine it with the NASA data, and publish that somewhere. And like for the NASA researcher to see that and the NOAA researcher to see their data being used, that inspires them to fill out metadata and to do these things because somebody's gonna read it. Like I think filling out metadata is frustrating when you think that nobody's going to possibly read this, but when you know someone's going to look at that, it's going to make their job easier. So yeah, how do we get that kind of feedback loops of inspiration?
When I was talking with Sophia before about some of the efforts at USGS, I was impressed by like open science efforts at USGS to engage with like native tribes people to actually crowdsource data in fishery areas. And I can tell you that they're not going to buy proprietary software to communicate that data back. So this community, just like it's done for the OpenStreetMap community, really needs to be working with the open science community to make this stuff, to make the efforts of citizens reach out into and have citizen scientists participate with the open science community. I want to ask about, besides data sharing itself, so that kind of segues to where I wanted to go there. We've talked about how the FOSS4G community and new standards and better software, et cetera, can help us get the data to people to solve problems. Besides that data sharing aspect, do you see any other aspects of open science, particularly with geospatial, that you think could be benefited by working with open source software community? Paige, can you tackle that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, as we've kind of mentioned, open science does mean different things to different people and has a pretty broad definition. There actually is a federal definition of open science that stresses not only the sharing of data and the writing of open code and open results, but the process and practice of how we're doing our science. I see all of these aspects as great ways to collaborate with the FOSS4G community. I see in many ways it's funny while we're here saying, oh, how can the open science work with the community, work with the FOSS4G community? I feel like they're very similar, or they're maybe one community in many ways. And maybe to what Chris was saying, I think that, maybe, in some ways calling two different communities, maybe kind of artificially separating. We want more people kind of working together. Anyway, we have different backgrounds maybe, but so I think everything we've been talking about, we've talked about data sharing, we've talked about building open source software that can help with the data sharing, but can also help with the processing of the data, the getting to the results, which is, very important in science. And I think you've kind of mentioned the citizen science aspect, which I think is also quite important. NASA does a lot of citizen science, and I think a lot of that is we recognize there are a lot of people interested in getting involved, and that's a great way for us to kind of put a priority on making sure we're using these open tools, so that helps us as well. Let's see, I had a point that I was trying to get to, and now I went in a roundabout manner.
Well, I'll let you can come back to it.
Yeah, so, okay, no, I think,
Yeah.
so, from what I can understand about the FOSS4G community, I come from the scientific research. I think there's a lot of that going on, but it's not specific to science research. What the FOSS4G community does with open street maps and things like this, I think it's a little bit more connected to local governments and kind of regional mapping and this kind of thing, which kind of is more grounded in these local communities that aren't necessarily in the research community. And I think that, to me, seems like a really fantastic partnership, where if we could, maybe the kind of open science community can engage more with the FOSS4G community to really make sure that the science results are really becoming are actionable, are actually being used in local governance, in mitigation strategies, if we're talking about climate change and this kind of thing. So again, this is maybe my personal take on what the FOSS4G community is, and some of the differences that we could leverage. But I see that as really one aspect that I think open science, more than data sharing, it's that communication side of that open collaboration. Maybe that's what I see as really beneficial.
Brian, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe try to say something, provocative to get the blood flowing here a little bit. I think a lot of scientists working in climate or weather or hydrology or oceanography or whatever it may be don't self-identify as doing geospatial stuff. It's not part of the curriculum. It's not part of the training. And it's not really part of the culture. I mean, I did a PhD in climate science from MIT. I graduated without knowing what a CRS is. Like, it's a very different world. Those fields need what the geospatial community has, the technology and the tools. But they think of their primary work as trying to understand the chemistry or the physics or the biology of some scientific process. And geospatial is just one aspect of that. So what that means for us, now putting on the hat as a geospatial person, is that, if we try and center like the geospatial aspect as like the core thing that we're doing, it might not find those audiences, and it might not have the impacts that we're looking for. But I think if we can integrate geospatial technology with those existing tools, existing technologies, and embed it, as part of the data, so that the scientists don't have to say, oh, I need to do this extra step to be geospatial, then we're going to go a lot farther. And I'll add one more related point, which is for many of these scientific domains, the time dimension is very important and very hard as well, right? So there's a whole world of data that's just about time series data and temporal data analysis. And here we've got spatial data, but really the scientific problems are all spatial temporal, right? And so I'm curious in hearing more about that time dimension as well, because it's a big challenge for many of these climate and weather data sets. So, weather data may not be very high spatial resolution. It looks very coarse compared to some imagery, but it's 30-minute, outputs for decades, right? So it's large and complex along a whole different dimension. So just a few thoughts about what work lies ahead in order to have those open science impacts.
Yeah. Sudhir, do you want to, you guys must work with I'm just kidding. We talked about your work, you're attending other scientific conferences and stuff, but not geo conferences. What are you thinking in terms of how this dialogue could happen?
No, I think one thing I also would like to mention about it will be nice to have actually policy around how we make there is like a collaboration effort going on, right? But it will be good to have some sort of policy around how we support the community.
Yeah.
I think, right? And I don't know exactly what that policy can be, but what I envision is there is a policy that actually allows government to work with the community, right? But again, just having a policy is not enough. There need to be a funding mechanism available to support that work, right? To sustain, right? Because there are lots of work that's built around the open source community, right? Mm-hmm. And especially in the weather service, we would like to use some of them, but we're operational.
Yeah.
We are not able to just take that and use it, right? Because we have, we also have a domain where one part of our program works on the research. There's another program we call R2O, research to operation, right? So there is a processes in a place which makes the research data to operation, right? I would love to see that, the same sort of collaboration effort with this community where, we can bring in some of those work built on the tools, the solution that's built that can be used by us as well, right? But there need to be a sort of procedure and look at some of the maturity level, how we can have that software to be integrated in our use cases, right? So have to have some sort of authoritative source workflows that we can have on. But for there need to be some sort of overseeing policies and the procedure in place that we can actually use some of that, right? I think that is one of the things that I see is missing and will be really good to have in that community that will really help us as well as to grow together with this community.
Yeah. Chris, you've actually gone through several of these, but aside from the data sharing part, what other collaboration or what you want to foot stomp on in terms of what the FOSS4G community could do to encourage open science?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan's points resonated with me, and I think just reiterate, the sort of humility, that we need to not say spatial is special, and if only you would do things spatially, then all the problems would be solved, but kind of that meet users way more than halfway and kind of figure out how do we get geospatial so it's easy to use, so it's the path of least resistance, and kind of take that on. So
yeah. Well, I think we have time for one closing thoughts from each of you, and I did want to, as we've gone through here, is there something that you've missed or whatever? So I'll start with Paige, and is there one other message that you want to make sure that to leave this audience with, or something that you wanted to make sure you got the point across today?
Mostly, I want to encourage you all to keep doing what you're doing. I think it's great. I love seeing so much in the open source space and the open data, all of what we've been talking about. So, yeah, I'll just encourage you to keep going.
Ryan?
I think my message would be we're at a really great and exciting time to be working in this space. I think Chris's talk gave a great summary of all the progress that's happened on, particularly around file formats, cloud optimized file formats and standards. And I think, we're good on file format. Let's not do any more. Let's
get to work.
But now let's build those engines that can work with those file formats and do amazing things with them. And visualization is one application, but large-scale, planetary scale compute and analytics and machine learning is, I think, where we're going to go. So I'm really excited to see what everyone is building and what we're going to build. And I think we're about to enter a golden age, basically, for geospatial data in the cloud.
Great. Sudhir, closing thought?
Yeah, so just to recap again, I can say enough what Ryan, Paige, and then Chris talked about. Yes, we are in that phase, right? We actually in my program, I'm so excited that now we're actually making some of our data set a lot more available in a way that's chunked, right? Because we talked about some of the geospatial and time series, right? Our users want both. And we're still trying to figure this thing out, right? We don't know, all of you, have worked with some of this community to know, what my chunking size is going to be, what my chunking schema is going to be. I don't know, right? So what I'm looking at you here in this community is to help us as well, right? I know there is, and that's why I was talking about having the right policy, but also I want to see a forge collaboration. And maybe we find some opportunity that FOSS4G can actually help us build that collaborative platform with this community, right? But I would like to see, some of the cool stuff that you're doing that I don't know, right? We don't have all the resource, but we can use your help, right? I think that's what I see, there's an opportunity for us to work together and use all the capabilities that we have around, and let's help us to help you as well so that we can serve our American public. I think that's the goal I'm looking at. I'm very excited with this opportunity to actually talk and share what we have right now. But this is a lot for me to learn rather than actually give it to this large community, actually. I'm here to learn.
Thanks, Dirk. Chris, you had to start. You want to recap?
Yeah, Brian's points resonate with me. No more data formats. I'm done with that phase of my career. I think the next step for me is, get all the data in these formats. It's pretty simple, but and it's less sexy work, but that's literally what I've started to do is just converting things and uploading them. And I think that gets this kind of wheel turning. I think the two things that become real interesting are data schemas, how do we go not just the format level, but everybody publishing buildings with the same attributes and be able to have those data sets grow. And then within that, I think IDs and getting to global IDs those to me are the next frontiers of make it so everyone could just publish data and it's interoperable, and we're not doing it schema mapping on the fly, but just starting to coalesce the data in common ways and publish it in common ways. So that's my closing, more technical thought.
Well, I want to thank all four of you, and I also want to thank Sophia, who wasn't able to be here, but did contributed mightily to all the questions. Really appreciate the discussion. If you wouldn't mind.